Hello everybody and welcome. Thank you for attending tonight's event. This forum on SB1, the landmark road repair legislation that was passed in 2017 by the California legislature and signed into law by the Governor Brown. My name is Chris O'Connor with Associated General Contractors of California. We're your host here tonight, and we are delighted to partner with the panelists here to give you an educational forum about the SB1, the law, and how it impacts your local community. To make the point clear, this is not a rally. This is supposed to be an educational forum where you can speak to nonpartisan experts about the value or perceived lack of value, but the law, SB1, and what the projects and how it impacts your local region. No one here is going to tell you how to vote, and we're more than happy to answer questions from the crowd as well. So you'll see there's question cards all along the seats, and I'm more than happy to answer those questions, and also panelists have agreed to stay afterwards to talk with you one-on-one if you need a little bit more in-depth of an answer. And so here on the panel today, we have our moderator, Mike Mangas of Dignity Health, Dan Little, head of local Shasta Transportation Authority, Kianna Valentine, the senior legislative representative of the California State Association of Counties, Orville Thomas, the Director of Government Relations for the California Alliance for Jobs, and Chris Handley, Tullis Construction, also the chair of the local AGC chapter up here in the Shasta District. So with that, thank you again for being here tonight, and Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I want to make it perfectly clear that we're going to try to stay right down the center lane here. We are not going to go one way or the other as far as how you should vote on Proposition 6. What you think about it, that's all up to you. So although it may appear the deck is a little bit stacked here with the people here, I want you to know that we will answer all questions as best as possible, and we will try to just keep an even right down the line here on what this is. I'm kind of looking forward to this too, because I want to learn more about the whole Prop 6 and maybe go back to SB1 and everything, and why is it that we pay these extra taxes at the time? Really, comes down to, are the taxes that we pay worth it? And that's something that voters will decide in November, I guess. So let's get right into it. We'll go ladies first. Kianna Valentine here, the senior legislative representative of CSAC, the California State Association of Counties.
Thanks so much for having me here today. I really, truly appreciate the opportunity anytime it's given to me to speak about transportation infrastructure, funding and policy. I've worked in this area for about 13 years and I'm extremely passionate about it. So any chance I get to engage with folks about real issues and have a honest, heartfelt debate is a good one in my opinion. Full disclosure, so you know, the organization I work for is the California State Association of Counties. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan association that represents California's 58 counties. So I represent in Sacramento and at the federal level, Shasta County, Butte County, and all of the other counties in the state. I'm hoping to set the stage for the rest of the conversation this evening and talk a little bit about the history of how we fund transportation infrastructure in the state of California. I'll get in a little bit about what SB1, the most recently passed transportation funding bill, does. I'll outline what Proposition 6 does, and then chat with you about some of the questions I think that you should ask yourselves as you're contemplating how to vote in the upcoming election. So let's start with, how do we fund transportation infrastructure in California and quite frankly at the federal level as well? Primarily, transportation infrastructure is funded through user fees. They were first levied in California and in the nation in about the 1920s. The more common term for what I believe constitutes a user fee is the gas tax. That's what most people know the transportation user fee in the state and the nation as the gas tax. You pay when you fill up at the pump per gallon excise tax for every gallon you purchase. That money goes into transportation accounts at the state level and then is distributed out in ways that we'll talk about in a little bit to local entities, cities, counties, regional agencies like the Shasta County Regional Planning Agency here, and then the state government for maintenance of the highway system. Another larger source of revenue until 2010 was the sales tax on gasoline. So in addition to a per gallon fee that you pay at the pump, the state levies a sales tax on a variety of goods, not just gasoline, right? Your stuff at Target, some of the things you buy at the grocery store, so on and so forth. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, the state legislature and the voters via an initiative, Proposition 42, decided to redirect the revenue from the sales tax away from the state's general fund and put that into transportation programs. In 2010, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds unless you ask me to, we did replace the sales tax with another increment of excise tax. So those are the two main sources of revenue for transportation in the state of California, in addition to federal funds that the state draws down. Another somewhat common but not necessarily consistent revenue stream are general obligation bonds for transportation. The last time voters passed one of those was Proposition 1B in 2006. So we are, as a state, continuing to spend those dollars, but I think we're getting just about to the end of what was available through that general obligation bond. And then local sales tax measures. I should know this off the top of my head. I'm not sure if Shasta is a self-help county or not, no. But there are, I think, 23 self-help counties in the state of California. Those are county-wide areas that have elected to increase their sales tax rate by a certain percent in their local communities and dedicate that money to local transportation projects. And that actually generates a lot of money annually for transportation throughout the state of California. I think it's important to talk about registration fees, vehicle license fees, and other sales taxes as well, because there is a common perception, misunderstanding, I don't know how you want to call it, that these revenues are spent on transportation or should be spent on transportation. So let's just talk about what registration fees do. That's the fee you pay at your annual, every year you get your annual bill for your registration. That fee primarily supports the California Highway Patrol, CHP, and then DMV functions. Your vehicle license fee is known really as an in-lieu property tax. So you pay your property tax on your home, property tax on other valuable goods. The vehicle license fee actually is used for primarily public safety and health and human service programs. So that's where those monies go to. And then I said other sales taxes, and really what I probably should have said was diesel excise and diesel sales taxes. So those are similar to the gas tax and sales tax on gasoline, but levied on a gallon of diesel. And those fund transit operations, capital improvements, as well as some goods movement and other things that support freight and the movement of goods throughout the state. Why are we even here talking about SB1 and Proposition 6 and why we need more revenue for transportation? Whether you get that revenue from existing taxes and fees or you raise taxes and fees to generate that money. Why does California need more money for transportation? There is a quantifiable, and I can point you to the data points where this comes from, a backlog shortfall of $130 billion on the state and local transportation systems, and that's just to maintain the existing roads, highways. So combined between cities, counties, and state highways, there's a $130 billion need over the next 10 years just to bring our system into a safe and efficient condition. We, CSAC and the League of California Cities and my counterparts at the regional transportation planning agencies throughout the state commission a study every other year to look at the condition of our roads. And the average condition in the state of California on the local system is what we call an at-risk condition, meaning that the older that these roads get, the less availability of revenues to invest in them, the faster they deteriorate and the more expensive they become to fix in the long run. So you can say the same thing about the state highway system. The percentage of lane miles on state highway system in good condition is less than ideal based on their studies that they do. More than 1,600 bridges in the state of California are structurally deficient. That is, I think, one of the more poignant points to recognize, because when a bridge fails, it's unlike when a road fails, right? A road washes out, you can drive around it. A bridge fails, Sometimes you have very, very significant detours or no way around that bridge failure at all, let alone the catastrophes that can happen if people are driving on the bridge at the time there is a failure. And then lastly, there are unfortunately still over 3,600 fatalities on average because of or on the transportation system in the state of California. That statistic comes from 2016, but that trend is continuing. And I can tell you, based on what I know about the county rural road system, more than 2/3 of those fatalities do happen on rural roads owned and operated by counties. So that's something that my membership, elected officials at the county level, are very interested in seeing funding to be able to correct those safety problems. So you've been paying a gas tax since the 20s. You pay a sales tax, which also funds transportation. Why is that not enough, right? That is the common question I get asked as an advocate on these issues. And I believe that these are the critical root causes of why we have a severe funding backlog in the state of California. First and foremost, inflation, just the natural erosion of the purchasing power of a dollar over time. I try to relate this to asking myself, could I support my family in 2018 on the amount of money I was making 20 years ago? You know, inflation erodes the purchasing power of my salary over time. And so that's why every year I ask for a raise and all of those other things. So that's a main driver as to why the revenue that we have in the state of California today has been insufficient to meet demand. Increases in fuel economy. The first car I owned was a 1982 Chevy Camaro, and I think it got 10 miles to the gallon. In order to get around and do my daily activities, I purchased a lot more gas than I do today. I'm driving a RAV4 hybrid. I get 35 miles to the gallon. So I'm doing the same amount of driving as I was, but I'm paying not nearly as much in terms of user fees for the same infrastructure. Alternative fuels and electric vehicles, although still a smaller portion of the overall fleet in California, we are starting to see that impact, essentially free riders. If you're not ever paying money at the pump, you are not paying into the system in order to use the infrastructure. Population growth. We are a very populous state, and we continue to see, despite some reports of mass exodus out of California, overall population growth is increasing. There are more people moving into the state, more people being born in California than are leaving. So it's just simply a math equation from my perspective. More people, more miles, less revenue to keep up with the necessary infrastructure, and that has led to what I call the transportation funding crisis, that $130 billion of unfunded, unmet need. This is just a graphical representation of two of those root causes. So if you adjust the gas tax, which was last increased in 1994, I should have mentioned that probably at the outset. The last time the gas tax was increased was 1994. Inflation alone has reduced the purchasing power of that 18 cents to 10.5 cents. And then if you account for fuel efficiency gains, it decreases the purchasing power of that 18 cents by another 1.5 cents. So it's just about half of what it used to be. Okay, so folks like me, representing counties who help maintain, own, and operate a large portion of the maintained miles in the state of California, worked with other organizations like AGC and the California Chamber of Commerce, environmental organizations, labor unions, business, a wide variety of transportation stakeholders since approximately 2015, which is when the effort to increase funding for transportation funding really got kicked off in earnest. And that ultimately resulted in the negotiated package that is known as SB1 now, the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. It had a companion measure that I want to make sure we talk about too that was really important, which is a constitutional amendment that you all had a chance to vote on in June, known as Proposition 69, that requires the new revenues generated by SB1 to be dedicated and protected for transportation purposes only. So what did the Road Repair and Accountability Act do? It increased the gas tax, it increased the diesel tax and diesel sales tax. It levies a new transportation improvement fee that you're going to pay annually along with your registration. And it levied for the first time in the history of the state and maybe nation, I'm not sure if another zero emission vehicle fee exists anywhere, so you can try to close the gap for those zero emission vehicle users who aren't paying into the system. And I think that about covers the types of taxes and fees that were increased. And what that will generate is over $5 billion a year, and that's invested into a number of multimodal transportation improvement programs. So for instance, locally, cities and counties will be getting $1.5 billion annually in direct subventions. So that means it doesn't go to the state does not decide how to invest those revenues. Those monies come directly down to every city and county in the state, and then the cities and counties decide how to invest those revenues locally for local priorities. The state highways get about $1.5 billion for improvements to Highway 5, 99, other highways owned and operated by Caltrans. There's investments to increase other mobility options for bicycles and pedestrians. There's investments in congestion relief, freight and goods movement, and then finally transit, which while I don't advocate specifically on behalf of transit, I think I have come to realize that transit not only is a mobility option, but a congestion relief option too. And then again, Prop 69 extended constitutional protections, existing constitutional protections, guaranteeing that those monies go to transportation projects. I just wanted to use this chart to illustrate what the gas tax, which the gas tax increase in SB1 was 12 cents. Basically, the increase in 12 cents just gets us back to how inflation eroded the existing purchasing power. Recall it was 18 cents, purchasing power was 9 cents. If you add 12 cents, that we're just about where we were in 1994, allowing us to do more with the existing revenues that we have. SB1 passes. Folks like me are very excited. We're finally investing more revenue into the transportation system so you can see improvements in your communities. And Proposition 6 qualifies for the November 2018 ballot. So what is Proposition 6? It is a constitutional amendment that would essentially repeal the increases in taxes and fees that SB1 made, repeal the $5 billion those taxes and fees generate for transportation projects, and then says all future increases in transportation funding must go to the legislature and then a vote of the people before they're authorized. So those are the primary nuts and bolts of what Proposition 6 is. This is coming to your upcoming November 2018 ballot, to your mailbox or voter polling place near you. And I put a little note here, Plan B question mark, because until yesterday, the proponents of Prop 6 did not officially have a Plan B. But then yesterday they did announce that they are going to try to qualify another initiative in 2020 with revenue for transportation. But I'd like to call out and make sure that should this become a reality, should Prop 6 pass and Plan B is in front of you in 2020, for you to look at it very closely, because based on my analysis of what I've seen so far, their Plan B would actually take money from local governments that cities and counties currently use for police, fire, that the state government uses for higher education and some other purposes, and send that to transportation. So it's not necessarily new revenue, it's shifting revenue away from existing purposes into another purpose. So that's what I know about the Plan B so far. And just make sure to, pay attention to that should things go that way. As I mentioned, I've been doing this a long time and interfacing with folks as often as I can, and these are some of the frequently asked questions that I get about transportation funding that I thought I would try to answer at the outset before I turn it over to my fellow panelists and take questions. I often get asked, how do I know the money's being spent efficiently and effectively? And that's a legitimate question. As taxpayers, you should want to know that your money is going to transportation and what types of things it's doing for you. So I was very pleased with the new requirements in SB1 that requires your cities and counties to adopt a list of proposed projects every year before they're able to access the new money. And they have to adopt that list of proposed projects at a public meeting at your city council or board of supervisors. So every year you will have an opportunity to see what your local government intends to do with your share of the money. And then at the end of every fiscal year, even more exciting if you want to hold your local government accountable, is the jurisdiction has to file an expenditure report and file it with the State Transportation Commission and make that public as well. So, for instance, the first expenditure report is due October 1st. So after the California Transportation Commission does its analysis, you should be able to see what your city or county said it was going to spend it on and what it actually spent it on. And I'm hoping, and I think they will look very similar, but that is an opportunity every single year for you to hold your local government accountable on how they invest your transportation funding. What about the state budget surplus? Why not use that money to fund transportation? Why do we need more taxes and fees? A couple of thoughts on this. First, if you go back to one of my earlier slides, I pointed out there's a $130 billion funding shortfall. That's a very significant amount of money that we've got to try to figure out how to invest into transportation. The budget surplus is currently $6 billion. I think we should put some of the surplus into infrastructure and transportation. That is absolutely a very good use of budget surplus. But it's not a replacement for a traditional user fee that is ongoing, robust, and consistent. Because we need something $6 billion, $130 billion, right? There's a large gap there. And why can't we use other existing revenues to invest in transportation? And again, I think I would argue that the money in the state budget today has been legislated on and debated and negotiated and put towards the programs that those dollars currently fund now. So in order to do that, we would have to cut money from other programs. So are we going to cut it from public services like police and fire? Are we going to cut it from education, from the judicial system? Those are the sorts of choices that we as a state would have to make in order to fund transportation outside of traditional user fees. Can the funding be rated, diverted, borrowed for transportation purposes? Hopefully I've already addressed this question. Let me acknowledge past borrowing of transportation revenues though, right? People pay attention and know that in the late 90s and early 2000s, the state was borrowing certain transportation funds for other purposes. In 2010, voters passed a proposition, Prop 22, that says even in a fiscal emergency, the state can no longer borrow transportation funds. And since 2010, the state has not borrowed transportation funds. So I want to make that really clear. There was a practice in the past, absolutely. That's something as a transportation advocate we have to live with. It wasn't anything I ever advocated for. But that ability to do that no longer exists. And lastly, per SB1, all of the remaining outstanding loans are being repaid right now. Cities and counties received their first loan repayment in February of this year. We're set to receive our second loan repayment any time now. And by 2020, transportation will have been made whole from the borrowing that happened in past decades. And then this one is a hard question to answer. But I'll give you some thoughts and you can draw some conclusions. How much is SB1 going to cost me? How much will Prop 6 save me? SB1, the Department of Finance calculated that the average cost to, or the cost to the average Californian will be less than $10 a month, approximately $120 a year per driver. That includes registration fees and the gas taxes you pay at the pump. So the inverse of that is Prop 6, a yes vote for Prop 6 to repeal SB1. It would save you at the pump, at registration time, approximately $120. However, there are some economic studies out there, National Transportation Research Institutes, that have looked at the cost in the form of a hidden tax of bad roads. So you're driving down a potholed road and you hit a really large pothole and you break an axle. Or something happened in Elk Grove in my neighborhood a couple of weeks ago where a big piece of asphalt broke loose of the freeway and came up and hit the windshield of a car, and it caused a big crash. And so those sorts of things cost you money, right? You have to go to the mechanic and get your car fixed. This report, it's called the TRIP report, estimates that on average we pay $762 a year in extra vehicle operating costs. So maybe you're paying a little bit more at the pump per SB1, but are you saving money in terms of getting better performance out of better roads? So that's something to consider as you're looking at the cost of SB1 versus Prop 6. These are the questions I think everyone should ask themselves when they're considering their vote on Prop 6 for November. What are the conditions of your roads and bridges in the city of Reading and the county of Shasta in your community? Are you happy with them or are you not happy with them? How much funding will your community receive in SB1 revenue? What benefits can you anticipate getting from that? What is your city, what is your county doing with that money? Are they fixing a road you drive on to get to work every day? What are the things that they're doing? And then if Prop 6 is successful, what are the things your city or county might not be able to do for you that you were hoping that they would do? What is the long-term consequences to the state of your infrastructure? Only you guys can answer those questions for yourselves, and so I hope that that has been some helpful information to set the stage for the conversation this afternoon. And once again, I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kianna. I appreciate Kianna leading off. Not all the speakers will take that long. I want you to know that. She just wanted to set the stage for the whole thing. So she was kind of our lead off. And our second up is a pinch hitter. Sorry, I'm a baseball fan. It's Dan for Fran, the chair of the California Transportation Commission. Fran Inman had her flight canceled this morning, so she couldn't make it. So Dan is going to pinch hit for her right now. I don't know if it was because of their potholes in the runway or what, but she couldn't make it up here anyway. So this is Dan Little, the executive director of the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency. Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Yeah, Fran did apologize for not being here, so I'll try to channel my best inner Fran on short notice here. I'm the executive director for the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency. A lot of folks haven't heard of us, but they see the types of projects that we're involved in. My board consists of city council members from all three of our cities and board of supervisor members. So we all get together a few times a year and decide on how transportation funding is spent. And sometimes it might seem like you get all those different council members from different jurisdictions in the same room and it doesn't work out so well, but it really does. So show up to a meeting and you can see that for yourself. Just don't show up to the next meeting because that one might not be as good. Show up to the one after that and that one will be less contentious. So what I wanted to do was talk about transportation funding and a little bit of what Fran was going to talk about, I know, and it would have been great to have the chair of the CTC because they really control or have a hand in just about every gas tax dollar that you see spent. So it would have been good to hear from her, and I know she's big on transparency and she wanted to talk about that. So what I want to talk to you, though, is maybe hit closer to home for you, is where these dollars go once you pay them at the pump, how much comes back to the region, what types of projects are you seeing getting funded here, and we have some information on that and a handout about that. So, you know, we could do it the hard way, which is this. I could explain this chart, which I think it says, I love it because it says a simplified overview. That's not my chart. So that's from the state, and that's a simple version. I won't put you through that. So if you were wondering that, don't worry, I'm not going to do that. I'm trying to get good. I see Mary at channeling converting government to English, translating that, and I have a chart there that kind of puts it out a little more plainly, I hope, and uses terms that aren't the technical names for programs about where these dollars go. So yeah, next slide, thank you. So I'm going to take it through. There's different programs, and this is actually a roll-up of different programs with different themes. So this gas tax money comes in, it almost all goes through the CTC in some fashion, and it gets allocated to different things. Some are formula funds based on different formulas, some are discretionary grants, and this is, again, just a summary, so there's tons of sub-programs under those, so it can get confusing in a hurry, but hopefully this will help. So the first category you see there on the left, and again, it's probably better on your handout than up there on the screen, is local streets and roads, and Kianna talked about that. This is somewhat direct money that comes to the city. It is direct. The cities have a say in it. They have to report to the California Transportation Commission about how they use it. But it's a great source of revenue. It's especially significant for the county. And when you look at our region, this chart is annual averages based on a 10-year projection. And so $11 million to our region. It's mostly population-based, but it's a little bit formula-based, and there's kind of a way to cheat sheet this about how certain formulas and programs we do compared to our population. So you see our population at 0.45%, almost 0.5% of the state of California. And you look at that program, we get about 0.63% of the transportation dollars. And that's because that formula is based partly on our road mileage. And because we have a big county that Pat needs to maintain, and we can maintain roads with this pot of money from Platina to MacArthur and from Cottonwood to Costella to maintain our roads, provide match to replace bridges, as well as money to cities to do the road maintenance work that they need to do. And next slide just shows some examples of the types of rehab projects that you see in the region. So on to the next program on the table. And this is an important part. And I should say on the previous one and this project, this Caltrans maintenance, it's about 2/3 of the total new gas tax dollars under Senate Bill 1. By the way, this just focuses on the Senate Bill 1 new money of the increase in gas tax, but it accounts for about 1/3 of all transportation revenue. So this new gas tax that's subject to repeal is a pretty significant chunk of the total budget since the program started. So the next program is the Caltrans State Highway Operation and Protection Program. Most of the construction you see on state highways these days is funding through this program. It's a fix-it-first program where it's to maintain the existing system, whether it's bridges, curve realignments, rehabilitation, interchange work, things to help the existing highway operate smoothly. What it's not for is capacity increasing, adding significant new lanes or new highways or things of that nature. And when you look at this is a needs-based program, and we in the region do pretty well. Again, at less than 0.5% of the population, but on average we get about 2% of the money statewide that comes to this region. And some people would say that's not fair, but I would argue it's very fair because we have so many road miles to maintain on the state highway system. It's hard to drive in this region without crossing a bridge somewhere, some very significant like Antlers Bridge, which is paid for by this program. And so thank goodness they don't distribute that money by population, or we'd never get a lot of the work done. The next one's for public transportation funding, otherwise known as transit. So this is public transportation funding for things like RABA operations, RABA capital needs, public transportation for seniors, people with disabilities, people not otherwise able to drive. And also we received a new grant through the Senate Bill 1 funds for an all-electric buses that you see up in the upper right-hand corner for a new service you might have read about that would be daily service between Redding and Sacramento through all-electric vehicles. It's going to be about 1.5 years off to make the purchases and set up the arrangement, but you'll be able to get to Sacramento without having to drive your car. And then the next program is the Regional Transportation Improvement Program. This is for major new significant capacity projects. It's a small amount that we get, but it's for freeway widenings. I think the best example of a past project that was funded through this program is the Dana to Downtown project you came in through right here on State Route 44, where we widened the bridges over the river and fix the Auditorium Drive interchange. So, so that's a very significant program, and that has a weighting of funding by road miles as well. And the next is the active transportation program. That's a program for non-motorized improvements for bicycles and pedestrians, funds bike lanes and other needs. There's a conservative estimate in here about the funds we would get to the region through this program of 0.5% that just matches the population. But in the past, there's been 3 cycles for this grant program, and we've received up to 5% on each cycle of funds. This region does very well competing for these grants. We have a lot of needs. If you get a chance, look at the Wall Street Journal today. We got some bad press about the safety of Reading. We were a bad red dot on the map, but nonetheless, we're doing a lot of significant improvements. And one improvement you might have been hearing about is the Diesel Horse to Downtown project to get you from the Diesel Horse Bridge area back into downtown with a separated bikeway facility. The next one is just planning grants. That's a lot that falls into our lap where we have to do a lot of planning, but it really tees good projects up. So we use grants like that to support projects like the K2 development project in the former Dicker store. We can use this funding to do studies that help projects along like that, and so it's an important source for our office. And the next slide is a freight program. This is the blue one, the second to the end. Freight program is important to us. This is a grant program that adds lanes, and mainly for the interstate. We were very fortunate in the first cycle of this program. You might have read in the paper that we got a grant to finish the widening of Interstate 5 to 6 lanes between Anderson and the city of Reading. So where you have that 4-lane gap between the 6 lanes to the north in Reading and the 6 lanes south of Cottonwood, this is going to fill that entire gap. And it's going to take care of some very important bridge needs. It's going to replace the railroad overcrossing by the Anderson outlet stores. And that was a substandard crossing that didn't meet the safety clearances. Very expensive, wouldn't have been able to do it with any other funding source but this grant. So, so that's a $120 million grant. And so we're certainly getting our share there with that first year of that program. So when you look at all that together, the Senate Bill 1 funds, a lot of people make the assumption that the funds don't make it back to this region. So when you pay at the pump, and I've probably assumed that too before I looked up the numbers, when you pay at the pump that the money ends up in the bigger cities. But when you look at what we do get, historically what we have gotten and what we will be getting, we tend to get about, for every dollar we pay at the pump in the region, we get about $2.50 back. So we're a donee county instead of a donor. And so when you have donees, you wonder, okay, well, who's the donors then? It's got to come from somewhere. And it is the big cities that do that. And that's partly because of these formula funds and having them based on street miles instead of per capita funding. So when you see a per capita funding program, not so good. Even transit funding, we don't get a good share because it's based on fare revenues that we get through public transit. So we don't have a BART system and things like that. But when you see programs that are road mile based and to fix roads, then the rural regions actually get a pretty fair shake, rural and small urban areas like ourselves. So anyway, I hope that helps illustrate how that funding is spent, and I'd be glad to entertain any questions back at the office or afterwards here. We're a local office just up the road, so feel free to get a hold of us. Our website's on there. We can get you in touch with local officials too, with the cities and the counties to get you all the information you need. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dan. Up next, of course, the construction industry has a vested interest in this. Chris Handley is from the local Associated General Contractors, and he's the Vice President of Tullis Incorporated. Chris.
Well, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate everybody taking their time out of their busy schedules to meet with us today and inform you a little bit more about SB1. So my job here today is to represent the Associated General Contractors of California and Tullis Inc. Tullis Inc. is a local general engineering contractor from Reading. I am Vice President of Tullis Inc., have been for the past 10 years. Mr. Lyle Tullis has been doing work around Reading for the past 40 years, many public works projects. You've probably seen our pavers out on the roads quite a bit. We're probably the guys and gals that are out there holding you up during the traffic control. So we appreciate your patience as far as that goes. You've probably seen a lot more work recently out on the roads if you paid attention. So I'm here to say that those SB1 funds are hitting the streets. As a contractor, we are extremely excited to see that there's a stream of funding that's coming through that is coming through yearly. This is perpetual, SB1 is. And so as a contractor, we're always trying to gear up and prepare, and that helps us prepare for the future as far as buying equipment and working with materials and supplying those that need those materials. And so it helps us plan. SB1 is spinning off a lot more work. The roads that are out there are in dire need and need repair. And these funds are being allocated through public works projects, and those dollars are going into those roads. I'm here to say that as a contractor, we've seen a big influx of work. And so I want to let you know that those SB1 funds are going into those roads. As you drive through construction projects, look for the signs out there. You'll see these projects funded by SB1 or federal dollars or whatnot, but you'll see a lot of projects that are out there. The SB1 funding is going into those projects. So look for those funding signs if you're curious. Well, where is this funding coming from? You will see that out there. So I encourage you to look for that as you're going through there. But in general, I'm here to represent the Associated General Contractors, and so I'm from the Shasta District, and essentially there's a lot of different contractors that do a lot of public works, from stripers to building bridges to paving to moving dirt, doing underground. And just here to say that I know as a member of the Associated General Contractors, we're all very excited to see this funding coming through, and it is being spent on the roads. And so it's an excellent source of funding, and it's just a step back a little bit with the recession in 2006, 2008, and the less miles traveled, and the gas tax is just not covering the funding that was needed for transportation. Everybody had to tighten their buckles a bit there and tighten down for a while. Wasn't a lot of funding going out there. None of the contractors were sure where things were going. Should we go back into private, stay public? And it's nice to see a steady flow of funding coming through so that we can prepare. And with that, we're hiring more individuals. We need more truck drivers. We need more laborers. We need more folks in our office. We need a lot more employees. And so we're diligently searching and trying to educate and train new employees. And so it's a great job opportunity. Those dollars are going to supply jobs to folks within Shasta County, be it Trinity County, around California. And so a lot of the members in the Shasta District do work not just in Shasta County, but in Trinity County, Siskiyou County, for the city of Anderson, Reading, Red Bluff. So, and all these dollars are getting transferred, as our panelists have been talking about, to those local cities and counties. And over the years, as you've been driving around the roads, I'm sure you've noticed how many potholes and just how much dire need there is to repair those roads and make them safer for yourselves, your families, the general public. And so, as a contractor, I'll leave you with one final example. Is over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of, with not a lot of funding being out there, we've seen a lot of projects that are getting what I would consider a Band-Aid, a typical thin lift overlay, or really not being able to put the funding into the project that was needed to really fix the road to last for 10, 15, 20 years down the road. We were just putting Band-Aids on things, but we're seeing projects come out now where we're going in and we're actually having the funding to fix the road properly so that it'll last longer and it'll be cheaper to come in and maintain in the future. So that's exciting. As far as a local contractor and a part of the Associated General Contractors of Shasta, we're excited to see the funding coming through, and we hope it continues. And I'd be excited to ask if you have any questions afterwards. I'll be up on the panel and help answer any of those questions for you for a local contractor if you have any more. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Well, as Chris said, the gas tax does fuel job growth. Sorry, I'm entertaining myself up here. Batting cleanup now. is my friend Orville Thomas. Speaking of jobs, he's the Director of Government Affairs of the California Alliance for Jobs.
Thank you, Mike. I hope I could entertain you a little bit before the jokes really start. And thank you all for giving me a chance to come up to Reading and speak with you guys and kind of explain some economic benefits. As Mike kind of alluded to, prior to my life as Director of Government Affairs, I was a very young reporter for 7R, and I spent 3 years here running around and experiencing some of the potholes on these roads and the traffic of being stuck getting to Bernie. So I'm glad I had a part in getting repaving projects come to this area. If we could start with our first slide. For the sake of my presentation, I'm going to base a lot on this kind of ratio and information. It came from the White House Council of Economic Advisors when they were taking the American Jobs Act. It's still maintained. It's probably one of the few things that both White Houses agree with over the last 8 years. So I was able to pull that out. It says $1 billion in federal infrastructure funding for transportation projects creates or supports around 13,000 jobs a year. So we wanted to find out, with California's investment starting last year of $5 billion in transportation infrastructure, is that accurate for what we're looking at for California? Is the same kind of ratio, the 1 billion equals 13,000 jobs created or supported, matching what we do here? Is it greater here? Is it less here? And what are the kind of economic effects that are both direct and indirect from a $5 billion investment annually in transportation infrastructure? Next slide, please. So we had that report commissioned by the American Road and Transportation Builders Association out of Washington, D.C. They are a think tank that kind of focuses on transportation infrastructure. Just for the sake of transparency, my organization, the California Alliance for Jobs, which is a nonpartisan advocacy organization that represents construction contractors and construction workers to work with public officials on making sure that the dollars that you guys are paying in taxes or in fees are going towards better roads, rebuilt bridges, water projects like dams or reservoirs, and urban infrastructure. So we wanted to get together and commission to see what is the effect economically of that investment. And these, go back one. And this is kind of the high level, what they have come back with. 68,000 jobs created or supported every year through that $5 billion investment. So that matches up very closely to what the White House was putting out during their infrastructure investment in the last decade. And those jobs would create about $3.3 billion a year in average wages. And close, it's $3.8 billion per year in savings for California drivers, transit riders, and businesses. So we've alluded to those kind of savings in previous speakers. That's the cost of vehicle maintenance, that's the hours you spend stuck in traffic, that's access to increased access to transit, so you're not in traffic or you're being able to get to a location at a quicker rate. That's also the savings that businesses have, whether it's big rigs and transportation companies and the vehicle costs and maintenance that are associated with driving all those hours and miles. These are the things that rebuilding our infrastructure around the state kind of saves those businesses. And then we talk about $11 billion per year in increased sales and outputs by California businesses. I will get to some of those $11 billion and where they come up with. But those numbers are pretty fact-based and check out based on what historically the federal government has used as their indicators and their outputs for transportation infrastructure investments. One of the paragraphs I really wanted to highlight, and I could give you guys the website if you want to read the whole 60-page report, is the transportation investment enacted under California under SB1 will support at least $182.6 billion in increased economic activity and benefits for California residents and businesses over the next 10 years, averaging about $18.3 billion a year. And you know, like I said, some people are going to ask me where we find those numbers. I will be glad to walk you through the facts if we want to look at the report on off time, just what the factors go in there. So that's economic impacts. Next slide. We get back to the jobs, and it goes, what does $5 billion in spending really get me? So what is it that you're getting? What's your return on investment for our economics classes? We said, what is the benefit to the costs? So obviously in construction, very big job driver. There's 23% of the jobs that will be derived in the construction industry out of that 68,000, but 77% of jobs that are available through that $5 billion infrastructure investment do come in other sectors. The largest one's probably going to be in the transportation sector, warehousing. So those are the goods movements. Making sure that you have increased access, that the trucking companies do have better roads, they could operate more, they could probably set up more maintenance and distribution facilities. We go 4,300 jobs in retail trade, 3,800 jobs in real estate and rental and leasing, 3,200 jobs in healthcare and social assistant, and 7,500 jobs in other services. So what happens is when you have stronger transportation connections and networks, you are able to increase your business action, whether it's Reading having greater access points to Sacramento in the Bay Area, or Los Angeles via I-5 and Highway 99, and being able to allow for greater goods movement on those roads, or even recruit more economic opportunities from businesses that are located in San Francisco or Sacramento or San Jose that are probably looking for greater retail space and a footprint, but don't want to pay those higher rent prices or cost of land prices. Having that connection to economic centers and hubs allows them to conduct business by locating here and then having their goods movement be able to go throughout the rest of the state or throughout the rest of the country. Next slide. So why do we need to spend $5 billion a year? Most people are wondering, don't we have enough money? What is the good return on this investment? Staying competitive with our goods delivery system. Currently, we have California is the most robust state for port imports and then exporting to the rest of the country. As our infrastructure continues to erode without this substantial investment, the ability of California to ship those goods throughout the rest of the country will start to be reduced. And companies that are looking to continue those goods movements will find different ports that are making the added infrastructure improvements that are necessary to transport those goods. So we'll see some of those goods not go to the Port of Long Beach, Port of LA, or the Port of Oakland because the cost of moving them would be so detrimental on a bottom line that they will then go up north to the Pacific Northwest, or those goods would move to areas of the United States, mostly in the Southeast, that are making these new investments in their port facilities and their transportation networks. Access to labor, the better our roads are, the easier it is for people to get to their job or to offer new jobs to different clientele. If there is an expansion of I-5 from Anderson to Reading, that opens up a new labor pool from people in the south part of the county or maybe in the north part of Tehama County to come to Reading with less traffic and less vehicle maintenance costs and have their jobs located in the Reading, Greater Shasta market. Increase market share and access to more customers. Similar, if we have easier access to larger economic hubs, then it does allow, it does allow for greater movement of people. Kianna and I were able to come up from Sacramento yesterday. It was a very lovely drive because some of those potholes are being refilled with transportation money. But having that access, especially with the recreation market for people that are hauling some of their boats or RVs, that you want to make sure that the infrastructure is developed that allows them to get up to these destinations with greater ease. Expansion of businesses, I touched on that, making sure that there are economic hubs and opportunities to locate different maintenance facilities or labor facilities in our area. And reducing production costs, the less money that they're spending on transportation and vehicle improvement, the more money they can focus on growing their business. And then firms grouping together, if there is a highway widening, overpass improvements, off-ramp improvements, it allows for larger companies to want to get together and locate similar interests in the same area. What we've kind of shown is that $1 in transportation capital stock improvements from the government, and in this case through SB1, is allowing for each business to have 30 cents in savings for each dollar that we put in. Next slide. So why do we want to spend this money? And this kind of hits not at the larger corporate level, but more your pocketbook and your kitchen table politics and your checkbook. Reducing the household expenditures on vehicle maintenance. The latest report from TRIP, Kianna kind of highlighted it, is over $800 for the state. And in Reading, Chico, the cost of maintaining your vehicles because of bad roads, whether that be one bad tire that goes out and is flat, or a rim that's bent up, or an axle that's broken, or anything that causes vehicle maintenance due to bad infrastructure, is around $500 for this particular area. It's $485. So those savings kind of offset what you might be saving if you didn't have to spend the $10 a month. And also that $10 a month may come with a false guarantee that the gas companies will lower the price of gas by 12 cents. Here you have a return on investment that the 12 cents you're paying in terms of the gas tax is actually going towards smoothing out roads and rebuilding bridges that does have a direct economic benefit to people in Shasta County. The ripple effect of money that is earned becoming money spent, as the contractors have pointed out, the more people that they hire allows for more money to be spent at local restaurants and local entertainment goods. I'm sorry, so sorry. So it allows for more direct and indirect economic benefits, and you have that ripple effect really going out, that people are going out more and spending more disposable income as they have more money from these jobs that are being developed, or more money from not paying the cost of flat tires or vehicle maintenance. Reducing time spent in traffic, we want to make sure that people are being productive with their time, and every hour you spend in traffic is an hour you're not being productive and actually getting something back from that. And kind of the most important thing, and this, going back to my time in Reading, we need it. Like, we have bad roads, especially in rural counties. 52 of California's 58 counties have at-risk or poor roads. $130 billion in deferred maintenance. And driving around today and kind of seeing where the fires had hit is really something that the Firefighters Association has talked to us about, that every time they have to make a choice or they spend more time thinking about the infrastructure that they drive on and the bridges that they drive over, is 1 second that they can't fight those fires and 1 second that they can't get people out of evacuation zones. So as we start thinking about infrastructure, especially in rural areas where there isn't a large sales tax or general fund, we're starting to ask public works offices, what would be your priority and where would you spend money on public infrastructure? So what roads do you choose to get repaved, and what bridges do you choose to get rebuilt, and what roads and bridges do you just kind of let degrade, especially for the roads going back into gravel? So we've talked to large public works departments in rural areas, and they say they have to start making these decisions based on the lack of funding that might be available to them post-November. Next slide. So who supports the spending, and who supports $5 billion in increased economic activity and increased economic investments for infrastructure? And this is the group that we want to highlight, or I want to highlight. My association is part of this, but we're hearing from professional firefighters, Firefighters Association, Association of Highway Patrolmen, Chamber of Commerce, the Building Industry Association, the truckers, small businesses, rural county representatives of California, and 400 other groups that have come together, very different stakeholders, but have started to see what that investment of transportation infrastructure for the first time in 23 years does mean for local counties and local cities. The jobs that are provided, the economic benefits, allowing large trucks that can now go through California because of increased height ordinances on overpasses, and the public safety aspects of being able to allow the firefighters and highway patrolmen safe access to the roads, has brought more people out to say we need to actually find a long-term sustainable and accountable situation where we could invest in California's transportation funds. Next slide. That's it. I could actually go drink this water. Thank you guys. My information is on the sheet. I am available after if you want to talk about some of the economic benefits of funding transportation. Thank you.
Thank you for playing hurt, Orville, and getting through that. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And thank you to the Association of General Contractors for hosting this event tonight.